In the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Arctic Ocean, where ice floes crack like thunder and the northern lights dance across a perpetual twilight, a new chapter in global power dynamics is unfolding. As of late 2025, reports indicate that Russia has brought several upgraded missile bases in its Arctic territories to full operational status, equipped with advanced hypersonic and anti-ship systems capable of projecting force across vast distances. This development, occurring amid escalating tensions with the West, has exposed a glaring vulnerability on NATO's northern flank, a region long considered a frozen frontier but now emerging as a potential flashpoint for conflict. With climate change melting sea ice and opening new shipping lanes, the Arctic is no longer a peripheral theater. It is a strategic battleground where Russia's militarization leaves NATO's defenses stretched thin, ill-equipped, and perilously exposed. To fully appreciate the significance of these new bases, we must first understand the Arctic's historical role in military strategy, a region that has oscillated between neglect and intense focus throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. The Arctic encompasses the area north of the Arctic Circle, roughly 66 degrees north latitude, including parts of 8 countries: Russia, the United States, Canada, Norway, Denmark via Greenland, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. It is a harsh environment, characterized by extreme cold, limited daylight in winter, and vast distances that challenge logistics and communication. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union viewed the Arctic as a critical buffer zone. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles hidden beneath the ice formed a key component of nuclear deterrence. Bases along the Kola Peninsula near Murmansk housed the Northern Fleet, the Soviet Navy's most powerful armada, with nuclear submarines patrolling the Barents Sea to counter NATO's Atlantic presence. Explain nuclear deterrence simply. It is the strategy where nations maintain weapons so destructive that no adversary dares attack, fearing mutual annihilation. Ballistic missiles launched from submarines can travel thousands of kilometers, carrying nuclear warheads that explode with the force of millions of tons of TNT. The Arctic's ice cover provided natural camouflage for these submarines, making them hard to detect. After the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, Russia's Arctic military infrastructure deteriorated. Funding shortages led to abandoned bases, rusted equipment, and a diminished fleet. By the early 2000s, the region seemed destined for demilitarization, with international cooperation focusing on scientific research and environmental protection under frameworks like the Arctic Council, established in 1996 to promote sustainable development among Arctic states. However, under President Vladimir Putin's leadership since 2000, Russia has systematically revived its Arctic posture. This resurgence stems from a combination of economic, strategic, and nationalistic motives. Economically, the Arctic holds immense resources, an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves and 30% of natural gas, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Russia, controlling over half the Arctic coastline, sees these as vital to its energy-dependent economy. Strategically, melting ice, accelerated by global warming, has opened the Northern Sea Route, a shipping lane along Russia's northern coast that shortens travel from Europe to Asia by thousands of kilometers compared to traditional paths through the Suez Canal. Politically, Putin has framed Arctic dominance as a restoration of Russian greatness, planting a flag on the seabed at the North Pole in 2007 to symbolize territorial claims. Step by step, Russia's militarization has accelerated over the past decade. Beginning in the early 2010s, Moscow reopened Soviet-era bases. On Franz Josef Land, an archipelago in the Barents Sea, the Nagerskoye base was modernized starting in 2015, featuring extended runways for fighter jets and air defense systems. By 2017, it was operational, hosting MiG-31 interceptors capable of supersonic speeds to patrol airspace. Further east, on Rangel Island in the Chukchi Sea, the Temp airfield was reactivated in 2014, supporting strategic bombers like the Tu-95, which can carry cruise missiles over long ranges. In 2018, Russia established the Arctic Trefoil Base on Alexandra Land, a self-sufficient facility with insulated structures to withstand -60 degrees Celsius, equipped for year-round operations. The pace intensified after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, which prompted Western sanctions and a reevaluation of security priorities. In 2023, the Russian Defense Ministry announced a 5-year plan to expand Arctic air bases, allocating billions of rubles to infrastructure. This included upgrading radar networks and deploying S-400 surface-to-air missiles, which can engage targets up to 400 kilometers away. By mid-2024, reports confirmed the installation of Bastion coastal defense systems on the new Siberian islands, armed with Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles that travel at Mach 2.5, making them difficult to intercept. These systems protect Russia's exclusive economic zone, extending 200 nautical miles from its shores, where resource extraction occurs. Entering 2025, key milestones marked the operational status of new missile bases. In January, satellite imagery analyzed by Western intelligence revealed completed construction at the Rogashevo base on Novaya Zemlya, an archipelago used historically for nuclear testing. This site now hosts Iskander-M tactical ballistic missiles, with a range of 500 kilometers and precision guidance for striking ground targets. By March, the Zapadnaya Litsa submarine base on the Kola Peninsula, home to Russia's Delta IV and Bore-class nuclear submarines, underwent upgrades including hardened shelters and enhanced command facilities. These submarines carry Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles, each with multiple warheads capable of reaching North America or Europe in under 30 minutes. In October 2025, during the Zapad 2025 military exercises, Russia demonstrated the integration of these assets, simulating missile launches and submarine patrols in the Barents Sea, areas overlapping with NATO's northern approaches. A pivotal announcement came in December 2025, when President Putin decreed the establishment of a non-permanent ice base at the North Pole, alongside additional Arctic projects. This floating platform, designed for rapid deployment, supports missile launchers and reconnaissance drones, extending Russia's reach into the central Arctic Ocean. Concurrently, Russia confirmed development of a fifth-generation nuclear submarine, enhancing its under-ice capabilities. These bases are not isolated outposts. They form a networked defense system linked by advanced communications and early warning radars, allowing coordinated strikes across the region. Hidden or less discussed factors reveal the depth of Russia's commitment and the challenges it faces. Climate change, while opening opportunities, also poses risks. Thawing permafrost destabilizes infrastructure, requiring costly reinforcements. Russia's economy, strained by sanctions, relies on Arctic revenues, oil and gas from fields like Yamal, to fund military expansions. Less visible is the human element. Indigenous communities, such as the Nenets and Chukchi, endure environmental degradation from military activities, including pollution from fuel depots and testing sites. Geopolitically, Russia's partnership with China amplifies its position. Through the Polar Silk Road, announced in 2018, Beijing invests in Russian Arctic infrastructure, including ports and icebreakers. In 2025, joint exercises simulated search and rescue operations, but underlying military cooperation, sharing satellite data and technology, strengthens both nations' presence. Another obscured aspect is technological asymmetry. Russia's hypersonic missiles, like the Kinzhal deployed at Arctic bases, travel at Mach 10, evading traditional defenses. Developed since the 2010s, these weapons exploit gaps in NATO's radar coverage, which is sparse in the high north due to harsh conditions and vast distances. Internal Russian documents leaked in 2024 suggest these deployments also serve domestic propaganda, bolstering Putin's image amid economic hardships. NATO's northern flank, encompassing Norway, Iceland, and the Baltic states, appears increasingly defenseless in this context. Explain NATO simply. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a military alliance of 32 countries, founded in 1949, where an attack on one is considered an attack on all. Its northern flank refers to the Arctic and North Atlantic regions, vital for transatlantic supply lines. Historically, NATO focused on Central Europe during the Cold War, but Russia's resurgence prompted a shift. In 2018, the alliance established the Joint Force Command Norfolk to oversee Arctic operations, and in 2022, Finland and Sweden's accession expanded its northern footprint. Yet vulnerabilities persist. Norway, sharing a border with Russia on the Kola Peninsula, hosts NATO's northernmost command but lacks sufficient air defenses against hypersonic threats. Its military, numbering around 30,000 active personnel, relies on F-35 fighters, but coverage gaps exist in the Barents Sea. Iceland, a NATO member without a standing army, depends on Allied rotations for air policing. Greenland, under Danish sovereignty, features the US-operated Thule Air Base with ballistic missile early warning radars, but its remote location limits rapid response. In 2025, exercises like Arctic Edge revealed logistical hurdles. Supply chains falter in extreme weather, and satellite communications suffer from ionospheric interference. Step by step, NATO's responses have lagged. In 2023, the alliance adopted a new Arctic strategy, emphasizing domain awareness through drones and submarines. By 2024, investments in undersea cables and radar upgrades totaled several billion euros. However, internal divisions hamper progress. budget constraints in countries like Germany and political shifts in the U.S. delay commitments. Russia's 2025 exercises closing vast Barents Sea areas disrupted NATO naval patrols, highlighting enforcement challenges. Uncrewed systems, drones for surveillance, offer promise, but deployment remains nascent. Hidden factors in NATO's defenselessness include cyber threats. Russia has targeted undersea infrastructure, as seen in 2025 sabotage attempts on fiber optic cables in the Baltic Sea. Environmental constraints limit basing options. Melting ice erodes natural barriers but complicates operations. China's growing presence, research stations doubling as dual-use facilities, complicates alliances as some NATO members seek economic ties with Beijing. The global implications of Russia's operational Arctic missile bases extend beyond regional security. An arms race could ensue, with the U.S. accelerating hypersonic programs and NATO investing in Arctic-capable assets, straining budgets amid other crises. Resource competition risks escalation. Overlapping claims under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea could lead to incidents, as seen in 2025 when Russian vessels shadowed Norwegian oil platforms. Environmentally, militarization exacerbates climate impacts, fuel spills, and sonic disturbances harm fragile ecosystems. Politically, it tests alliances. Finland and Sweden's integration strengthens NATO, but vulnerabilities could embolden Russia elsewhere, like the Baltic states. Economically, control of the Northern Sea route could redirect global trade, benefiting Russia and China while bypassing Western choke points. Security dilemmas arise. NATO's buildup might provoke Russia, perpetuating a cycle of mistrust. In North America, Canada's Arctic sovereignty faces strain with limited icebreakers compared to Russia's fleet. Broader, this underscores multipolarity. As U.S. dominance wanes, regions like the Arctic become arenas for great power rivalry. In conclusion, Russia's activation of new Arctic missile bases in 2025 represents a calculated assertion of influence in a thawing frontier, exploiting NATO's northern flank vulnerabilities with precision and foresight. What began as a post-Cold War thaw has reverted to frozen confrontation, driven by resource imperatives, technological advances, and geopolitical ambitions. The alliance, while resilient, must confront its gaps, logistical, technological, and strategic, to safeguard this vital region. Yet deterrence alone is insufficient. Diplomacy, through forums like the Arctic Council, offers a path to de-escalation, balancing security with cooperation on shared challenges like climate change. As the ice recedes, revealing both opportunity and peril, the international community stands at a crossroads. Embrace mutual restraint or risk a chill that engulfs the world. The Arctic silence, once a veil of isolation, now echoes with the weight of unresolved tensions, reminding us that in the pursuit of power, the coldest battles may prove the most enduring. As the operational status of Russia's newly upgraded Arctic missile bases solidifies in late 2025 and early 2026, the strategic calculus on NATO's northern flank grows ever more precarious, revealing layers of vulnerability that extend beyond mere hardware deficiencies into the realms of doctrine, logistics, and political cohesion. The bases in question, Nagerskoy on France-Joseph Land, Temp on Rangel Island, Arctic Trefoil on Alexandra Land, and the expanded facilities on Novaya Zemlya and the Kola Peninsula, do not operate in isolation. They form an integrated bastion defense architecture, a concept refined by Russian military planners since the early 2010s. This strategy envisions the Arctic as a protected sanctuary for Russia's second strike nuclear forces, particularly its ballistic missile submarines, which patrol under the ice cap to ensure survivability in the event of conflict. Explain the bastion concept simply. It is akin to a fortified harbor where the most valuable ships are sheltered behind layers of defenses. In Russia's case, the ships are nuclear submarines carrying intercontinental missiles, and the harbor is the Barents and Kara Seas, shielded by air defenses, anti-ship missiles, anti-submarine warfare assets, and electronic warfare systems. The newly operational bases contribute directly to this layered shield. Nagerskoy, with its extended 3,500-meter runway and permanent deployment of MiG-31BM interceptors armed with Kinjal hypersonic missiles, can dominate airspace over the Norwegian Sea and much of the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom gap, a critical choke point for NATO reinforcements crossing the Atlantic. The bastion piece systems on T. New Siberian Islands and Kotany Island, now fully integrated with over-the-horizon radars, create an anti-access area denial bubble extending hundreds of kilometers, threatening any naval force approaching from the east. Step by step, the activation process has been methodical and largely opaque to Western observers, until satellite imagery and occasional Russian state media releases confirmed milestones. In the spring of 2025, engineering battalions completed hardened missile silos and launch platforms at Rogashevo on Novaya Zemlya, designed to withstand extreme weather and potential strikes. By summer, crews installed containerized Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles, capable of Mach 9 speeds and ranges exceeding 1,000 kilometers, at coastal sites, complementing the older Onyx systems. Autumn brought the deployment of electronic warfare units, including the Murmansk-BN complexes that can disrupt GPS and communications over vast areas. Finally, in December 2025, integrated testing during the GROM exercises validated command and control links, allowing real-time targeting data from satellites, submarines, and drones to feed directly into missile batteries. Less discussed are the enablers that make this buildup sustainable despite Western sanctions. Russia's fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers, now numbering over 40, with several new Project 22,220 vessels entering service in 2025, ensures year-round supply lines to remote bases. The Akademik Lomonosov floating nuclear power plant, towed to positions supporting eastern Arctic outposts, provides reliable electricity independent of fuel convoys vulnerable to interdiction. Dual-use infrastructure blurs lines between civilian and military. The Northern Sea Route's ports, developed with Chinese investment, double as logistical hubs for troop rotations and equipment prepositioning. Indigenous labor and conscript rotations supplement professional forces, though reports of harsh conditions and high turnover highlight human costs rarely acknowledged in official narratives. Another hidden factor is Russia's investment in under-ice warfare capabilities. The Poseidon nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed unmanned underwater vehicle, essentially a strategic torpedo with unlimited range, has reportedly reached initial operational capability by late 2025, with basing options in Arctic waters. This system, designed to create radioactive tsunamis against coastal targets, represents an asymmetric escalation tool that NATO planners struggle to counter. Similarly, advancements in fiber optic sensing arrays along the seabed allow detection of submarine movements with unprecedented precision, turning the Arctic Ocean floor into a monitored domain. NATO's response, while accelerating, remains fragmented and insufficient to close the gap. Norway has increased its defense budget to over 2% of GDP, acquiring new P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft and upgrading its Håkonsvern submarine base, but its forces are oriented primarily toward territorial defense rather than power projection. The United Kingdom's carrier strike group deployments to the Norwegian Sea demonstrate commitment, yet carrier aircraft lack the range and payload to sustainably contest Russian air superiority deep into the Barents. The United States, through its Arctic strategy updated in 2024, has prioritized icebreaker construction, aiming for 3 new heavy polar security cutters by 2030. But as of 2025, only one is under contract, leaving a capability shortfall compared to Russia's armada. Finland and Sweden's NATO membership, finalized in 2024, has expanded the alliance's northern land border dramatically, yet integration challenges persist. Finnish conscripts and reservists bring valuable cold-weather expertise, but harmonizing command structures, munition stocks, and communication protocols requires years. Joint exercises like Arctic Challenge and Cold Response have grown in scale, involving thousands of troops simulating high north combat, but they expose persistent issues: inadequate cold-weather gear stockpiles, limited Arctic-trained units, and dependence on vulnerable airlift for rapid reinforcement. Cyber and hybrid threats compound physical vulnerabilities. Russia's main intelligence directorate has intensified operations targeting Nordic energy infrastructure, as evidenced by 2025 incidents involving drone swarms over Norwegian gas platforms and unexplained undersea cable disruptions in the Baltic approaches to the Arctic. These gray zone tactics aim to deter NATO cohesion without crossing thresholds that would trigger Article 5 collective defense. Internal NATO debates, particularly Germany's reluctance to commit heavy brigades northward due to commitments in the Baltic states, further dilute focus. The global implications of this imbalance ripple outward in profound ways. An undefended northern flank undermines NATO's overall credibility if Russia can establish dominance in the Arctic without significant cost. It may embolden risk-taking elsewhere, from Kaliningrad exclave maneuvers to pressure on Baltic Sea lanes. Transatlantic reinforcement routes, vital in any European conflict, become contested, submarines emerging from Arctic bastions could interdict convoys long before they reach European ports. Nuclear escalation dynamics shift. Russia's improved second strike posture strengthens its deterrence, potentially lowering thresholds for conventional aggression under a nuclear umbrella. Resource security enters the equation directly. The Arctic's mineral wealth, rare earths critical for electronics and green technologies, falls increasingly under Russian influence, with mining projects on the Taymyr Peninsula and Yamal advancing rapidly. Western firms excluded by sanctions cede ground to Chinese partners, accelerating a realignment of critical supply chains away from democratic oversight. Shipping insurance rates for the Northern Sea route, controlled by Moscow, reflect perceived risks, potentially diverting trade flows and altering global economic geography. Environmental consequences, often sidelined in security discussions, demand attention. Military activities accelerate black carbon deposition on ice, hastening melt rates already at record levels in 2025. Fuel spills from expanded operations threaten fragile marine ecosystems, while sonar and submarine traffic disrupt migratory patterns of whales and fish stocks shared internationally. Indigenous communities whose traditional livelihoods depend on these resources face compounded pressures from both climate change and militarization. Diplomatic avenues, though strained, offer glimmers of mitigation. The Arctic Council, sidelined since Russia's 2022 Ukraine invasion, saw tentative resumption of working-level talks in late 2025 on search and rescue and scientific cooperation, areas where mutual interest persists. Bilateral confidence-building measures, such as advance notification of exercises, could reduce miscalculation risks. Yet broader de-escalation hinges on resolving underlying conflicts, a prospect dimmed by ongoing hostilities elsewhere. In contemplating the long-term trajectory, Russia's operational Arctic missile bases expose a fundamental asymmetry in great power competition. A revisionist state's focused investment in a specific domain versus a status quo alliance's diffuse commitments across multiple theaters. NATO's northern flank is not yet defenseless in an absolute sense. Its members possess technological edges in certain areas, such as stealth aircraft and precision munitions, but the momentum favors Moscow in the near term. Closing this gap requires sustained political will, increased defense spending, prepositioned equipment in the high north, multinational Arctic brigades, and investment in next-generation countermeasures like directed energy weapons and quantum sensing. Yet military solutions alone cannot resolve the underlying tensions. The Arctic's transformation from frozen periphery to contested core demands a holistic approach. Robust deterrence paired with pragmatic diplomacy, environmental stewardship integrated with security planning, and economic diversification to reduce resource-driven rivalries. As ice continues to recede, revealing both seabed riches and strategic vulnerabilities, the international community must navigate this new reality with foresight rather than reaction. Russia's achievement in rendering its Arctic bastion operational marks a restoration of capabilities lost in the post-Soviet era, executed with determination amid adversity. NATO, awakened to the threat, faces the imperative of adaptation, not merely to counter missiles and submarines, but to preserve a rules-based order in a region where power increasingly speaks through presence and projection. The silence of the Arctic, interrupted by the hum of engines and the distant rumble of tests, serves as a solemn reminder. In the pursuit of security, neglect of any flank invites peril, and the coldest frontiers often prove the most consequential. As nations weigh their commitments beneath the aurora, the choices made today will echo across generations, shaping whether this vast white expanse becomes a domain of cooperation or the prelude to wider confrontation. As the strategic ramifications of Russia's fully operational Arctic missile bases continue to unfold through the opening months of 2026, the asymmetry between Moscow's focused militarization and NATO's fragmented response becomes increasingly stark, prompting a reevaluation of alliance priorities and capabilities in one of the world's most challenging operational environments. The Bastion architecture, now at peak readiness, integrates not only surface-to-air and anti-ship missiles but also a sophisticated sensor network that fuses data from space-based assets, over-the-horizon radars, and passive acoustic arrays deployed along the continental shelf. This multi-domain awareness allows ocean commanders to detect intrusions, whether aerial, surface, or subsurface, at distances that afford ample reaction time, effectively pushing NATO's operational freedom farther south into the Norwegian Sea and beyond. Step by step, the implications for NATO's northern flank manifest in operational planning and force posture adjustments. In January 2026, the alliance's military committee convened an extraordinary session to assess Arctic contingencies, resulting in a classified directive emphasizing enhanced domain awareness and rapid reinforcement mechanisms. Publicly, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte announced increased rotational deployments to Norway's Tromsø region, including U.S. Marine Corps prepositioned equipment from caves in central Norway, stocks of tanks, artillery, and munitions intended for a brigade-sized force. Yet these measures, while symbolic of resolve, confront practical limitations. The equipment, stored since the Cold War era, requires extensive refurbishment, and the logistics of moving heavy armor across fjords in winter conditions remain daunting, with road and rail capacities constrained by geography and weather. Norway's own contributions highlight the strain on smaller members. The Norwegian Armed Forces, prioritizing high-readiness units like the Brigade Nord stationed above the Arctic Circle, have invested in new Leopard 2A8 tanks and F-35 integration for ground support. However, personnel shortages, exacerbated by demographic trends and competition from civilian sectors, limit sustained operations. Conscription, mandatory for both genders, provides a broad base but yields limited professional expertise for complex Arctic warfare. Joint training with allies, such as the biennial exercise Cold Response involving up to 30,000 troops, demonstrates interoperability but also exposes gaps. Insufficient heavy-lift aircraft for rapid deployment, vulnerability of forward airfields to preemptive strikes, and reliance on satellite communications susceptible to jamming. Less discussed in strategic analyses is the psychological dimension of this imbalance. Russian propaganda, amplified through state media and social channels, portrays the Arctic buildup as defensive necessity against NATO encirclement, a narrative that resonates domestically amid economic pressures from sanctions. Exercises like GROM 2025, featuring simulated nuclear releases and hypersonic strikes, serve dual purposes, validating tactics while signaling resolve to Western audiences. This messaging contributes to deterrence by doubt, sowing hesitation among NATO planners wary of escalation ladders that could spiral toward nuclear thresholds. Another underappreciated factor is the role of emerging technologies in tilting the balance. Russia's deployment of containerized missile systems, modular launchers that can be rapidly repositioned on icebreakers or coastal barges, introduces operational flexibility that static NATO defenses struggle to match. Artificial intelligence integration in command systems, reportedly tested at Nagarskoye, enables autonomous target prioritization, reducing human decision loops in high-latency environments. Conversely, NATO's advantages in stealth technology, F-35s operating from forward bases in Iceland or the Faroe Islands, offer penetration potential, but sustained presence requires tanker support vulnerable to long-range air defenses. The involvement of non-Arctic powers further complicates the theater. China's expanding footprint, framed as scientific and economic cooperation, includes dual-use research stations on Svalbard and investments in Russian liquefied natural gas projects like Arctic LNG-2. In February 2026, a joint Sino-Russian convoy transited the Northern Sea route under icebreaker escort, demonstrating coordinated logistics that could extend to military contingencies. Beijing's satellite constellation, providing high-resolution imagery over polar regions, indirectly bolsters Russian situational awareness. NATO responses, such as the U.S. Space Force's Arctic Sensor initiatives, aim to counter this, but deployment timelines extend into the late 2020s. Environmental dynamics intersect with military realities in ways that favor the incumbent. Russia's decades of Arctic experience yield advantages in cold-weather engineering, heated runways, insulated hangars, and specialized fuels that prevent gelling at extreme lows. NATO forces, rotating from temperate climates, require extensive acclimatization and equipment modification. Climate change, while eroding permafrost and complicating base stability for all parties, disproportionately affects newcomers. Unpredictable ice conditions hinder navigation for vessels lacking Russian-class ice reinforcement. Financial and industrial constraints compound NATO's challenges. Defense budgets, while rising collective spending exceeded 2% of GDP for the alliance in 2025, remain allocated primarily to eastern flank requirements, heavy D. Divisions in Poland, air policing over the Baltics, and maritime patrols in the Black Sea. Redirecting resources northward demands political trade-offs, particularly in nations distant from the threat like Spain or Italy. Industrial base limitations delay delivery. Orders for new Arctic-capable frigates and submarines face years-long backlogs, while Russia's state-directed shipyards prioritize military production despite sanctions. The global implications extend to nuclear stability and arms control regimes. Russia's enhanced bastion erodes mutual vulnerability assumptions underpinning strategic deterrence, potentially incentivizing U.S. countermeasures like expanded missile defenses or forward basing of intermediate-range systems, options constrained by the lapse of the INF Treaty in 2019. Dialogues on risk reduction, once routine through channels like the NATO-Russia Council, suspended since 2014, remain stalled, increasing miscalculation risks during close encounters, such as submarine shadowing or aircraft intercepts that occur weekly in the Barents region. Resource governance emerges as another contested domain. Russia's extended continental shelf claims, submitted to the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, overlap with Danish and Canadian assertions around the Lomonosov Ridge. Militarization bolsters these claims de facto, complicating legal adjudication. Western exclusion from Arctic energy projects drives reliance on alternative suppliers, with geopolitical consequences. Increased Middle Eastern imports heighten vulnerability to other choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. Indigenous perspectives, often marginalized in great power discourse, warrant consideration. Communities across the circumpolar North, Sami in Scandinavia, Inuit in Canada and Greenland, Yupik in Alaska, express concerns over militarization's environmental footprint and disruption of traditional hunting grounds. Consultative mechanisms like the Arctic Council's Indigenous Peoples Secretariat offer venues for voicing these issues, yet security classifications limit transparency. Diplomatic initiatives in early 2026 offer tentative pathways forward. Norway's bilateral incidents at sea agreement with Russia, renewed despite tensions, provides deconfliction protocols. Proposals for Arctic military confidence-building measures, limiting exercise scales, establishing hotlines, or designating no-deployment zones, circulate in academic and think tank circles, though political will remains elusive. Multilateral forums like the International Maritime Organization regulate shipping safety, indirectly constraining military activities through environmental protections. In reflecting upon this protracted standoff, Russia's operational Arctic missile bases underscore a broader shift in the global security landscape. The return of geography as destiny in an era of renewed great power competition. The northern flank's vulnerabilities are not merely technical but systemic, rooted in divergent threat perceptions, resource allocation priorities, and alliance cohesion strains. NATO's response, while gathering momentum through new commands and capabilities, confronts a deficit accumulated over decades of post-Cold War optimism. Closing this gap demands more than procurement. It requires strategic imagination. Investments in resilient communications, low Earth orbit constellations immune to jamming, distributed sensing networks, and autonomous systems could level asymmetries. Enhanced multinational frameworks such as a dedicated Arctic Joint Force might concentrate expertise and resources. Yet ultimate resolution lies beyond military balances. In addressing root causes of mistrust through pragmatic engagement on shared interests like scientific research, pollution mitigation, and sustainable development. The Arctic's transformation challenges assumptions of perpetual peace in the high north, revealing how environmental change can amplify rather than ameliorate security dilemmas. Russia's achievement in fortifying its bastion reflects disciplined prioritization amid constraints. NATO's task is to match this focus without mirroring authoritarian methods. As thawing waters open new frontiers, the choices confronting policymakers escalate in kind or seek cooperative safeguards, will determine whether this region becomes a model of managed competition or a catalyst for broader confrontation. In the end, the operational status of these missile bases serves as both warning and opportunity. A call to vigilance that, if heeded wisely, might yet foster the restraint necessary for coexistence in a domain where nature's harshness once imposed its own deterrence. The aurora's silent glow over fortified outposts reminds us that power projection in the Arctic, however sophisticated, operates within limits imposed by environment, economics, and human judgment. Navigating these constraints with foresight offers the surest path to preserving stability in a region whose fate increasingly influences the world beyond its frozen horizons.